Look, we need to talk about what's actually happening with the Blue Jays rotation right now, because it's starting to feel less like a rebuilding moment and more like a genuine crisis. Not in a dramatic way, but in a real roster construction way that's quietly threatening everything Toronto's been building toward. The Jays are hanging around in the middle of the pack in the AL despite basically running half their starting five through a medical tent. And yeah, Vladdy and the offense are doing heavy lifting, but there's only so much a bat can do when you're asking your pitching staff to hold back tides that frankly shouldn't exist in the first place. The injury list reads like a casualty report. Cody Ponce is done for the year. Shane Bieber isn't coming back anytime soon. You're watching guys like Dylan Cease pitch like he's auditioning for a Cy Young Award, while Kevin Gausman and Trey Yesovich are out here proving they belong in any postseason conversation. That's your top three right there, and honestly, it's excellent. But here's the thing. You can't keep asking three guys to carry the entire load when your back of the rotation is basically held together with duct tape and prayer. There's been conversation around the industry about what Toronto needs to do, and one name keeps surfacing that makes genuine sense from a positioning standpoint. Freddy Peralta. And I know what you're thinking, the Mets guy? Yeah, the guy on the expiring contract in New York, who's currently putting up a 3.12 ERA across his first 8 starts? That's the one. Here's why this actually matters, and why Christopher Klein from Fansided has been building a case that Toronto should legitimately be looking at this. Peralta's the kind of pitcher who doesn't just pitch, he stays healthy. That's not a small thing when you're staring at a rotation that's actively crumbling around you. Historically, Peralta's one of the more durable starters in baseball. That's not luck. That's built different. And coming off a finish where he landed top 5 in NL Cy Young voting, you're not getting some fringe arm here. You're getting legitimate star pedigree. The kind of pitcher that makes sense on a resume. The Mets situation is actually the key that unlocks this whole thing. They're floundering. Badly. And according to Bruce Levin over at 670 The Score, they've already started having conversations with the Chicago Cubs about Peralta, which means the market is alive on him. The Mets aren't exactly holding the line here. They're looking to move salary in pieces because staying competitive with their current trajectory isn't happening. That's when the Blue Jays, a team that just won the AL East and made the World Series last year, come into focus as a real alternative. Toronto's front office has shown repeatedly that they're willing to spend on the open market. That's not a secret. They've got the financial apparatus to go after difference makers, and they've got the credibility of recent success that guys actually want to come here. A team that was just in the Fall Classic is appealing. A team with Vladdy in the middle of the lineup is appealing. A team that made a World Series run while half their starting rotation was on the shelf is actually a pretty compelling pitch to a pitcher like Peralta. The extension piece here is equally important. The Mets tried unsuccessfully to work out a long-term deal with Peralta and couldn't get it done. But Toronto's been smarter about the back end of that stuff. There's actual competence in how they structure deals, and they've shown they're not afraid to commit resources to guys they believe in. Peralta is the exact profile where you can negotiate an extension that works for both sides. He gets the security. Toronto gets the continuity in their rotation for the next 3, for years while all this injury stuff filters out. Think about what this rotation would look like with Peralta added to the existing structure. Cease is already pitching like a Cy Young candidate. Gausman's been steady. Yesovich the kind of young talent that belongs in that conversation. Peralta as your number 4 or 5 starter. That's not a gap. That's actual depth. That's the difference between limping through September and actually competing for something real in October. The business case makes sense too. The Mets are going to move Peralta, whether it's to Chicago, Toronto, or somewhere else. The question is whether Toronto's willing to step into the conversation and offer something that makes sense for both sides. The Mets don't have leverage here. They're losing. Their fan base is frustrated. They need to cut payroll. That's a position of weakness in the negotiation, and Toronto should be prepared to exploit it, not in a ruthless way, but in a professional way that acknowledges market realities. What's interesting about this moment is that it highlights how fast roster situations can shift. 3 months ago, we were talking about the Blue Jays as World Series contenders coming off a great offseason. Now you're talking about rotation depth like it's a crisis. It's not a crisis in the sense that everything's falling apart, but it is in the sense that doing nothing and just hoping guys come back healthy is a strategy that costs playoff appearances. Toronto needs to be proactive. They need to be looking at the market and identifying the guys who can actually stabilize their situation. Peralta checks every box. Durability, pedigree, availability, and reasonable cost given that he's not a top-tier free agent after the season. He's also the kind of pitcher who doesn't require a massive prospect haul to acquire, because the Mets are actively looking to move him, not holding firm. That changes the dynamic significantly. This isn't a situation where you're trying to pry a guy away from a contending team. You're helping another team shed pearl while fixing your own rotation. It's how baseball actually works when you understand leverage. The reality is that the AL East is still there to be won. Baltimore's not running away. Boston has its own issues. The Yankees are Yankees, but they're not unbeatable. Toronto being in the middle of the pack right now with these injuries isn't destiny. It's a snapshot, but snapshots become seasons if you're not intentional about addressing problems. Cody Ponce being done and Bieber being out long-term aren't things you can solve with time. You solve those with actual acquisitions. If the Blue Jays front office is serious about competing, and based on their recent history, you'd think they are, Freddy Peralta should be a name that's actively in their conversation, not as some wild long shot or trade chip gamble, but as a legitimate solution to a genuine problem. The Mets are essentially gift-wrapping an opportunity here. Toronto just needs a vision and the willingness to take it. That's where we are. The conversation is already happening around the league. The question is whether Toronto is going to be part of it or watch another chance slip away while they're stuck in the middle of the pack, wondering what could have been. One deal could fundamentally change the narrative around this season. One decision could be the difference between a playoff team and a team that's just trying to survive to September.